and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams. Hello, hello. Big welcome back to the Dreamcast. Our next guest, well, two guests you'll hear from today, are entrepreneurs. So they started their company in 2009, but they didn't always start out that way. One guest was a Navy SEAL, and one spent a year as a photojournalist, and they have quite the background. But what you'll find is that when you are in transition and you want something different, even if it's not easy, it's always worth it. So I'm super excited to hear about what they were doing prior to creating their strict Paleo treat product and why they chose to create this specifically, but then the ups and downs along the way. Because as they say, that 10-year overnight success, they've been in business for almost 10 years, which means I know that they've learned a lot on their journey. So please welcome the owners of Paleo Treats, Nik and Lee Selman.
Right
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Well, I'm excited to connect with you. I know you live in sunny San Diego, California. I feel like so many cool things happen out that way. So, Nik, I'll start with you. You were a Navy SEAL prior to being an entrepreneur. Can you tell us a little bit about what life was like before 2009?
Yeah, it was actually well before '09. I joined the Navy in 1995, and I was out by 2000, did some contracting afterwards, but that experience as a young man, as a, say, 17 to 23-year-old, shaped the way I view the world. And it wasn't until I met Lee that I started to think that maybe I could run a business and really think out of the box. Because up until then, despite the common wisdom, anyone in the military kind of thinks inside a general box. And once I met Lee and kind of realized that, maybe there's more to this thing than thinking within these lines, that's when I began to expand my mind and think about running a business or being an entrepreneur or starting, running my own show.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I grew up in the suburbs, and I feel like I was taught, go to school, get a job, stay there for 30 years, like very employee mindset, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And there's a whole other world out there that we're not necessarily taught in school. And I can imagine being in the military, you were kind of taught to follow orders and do the thing and, all of on like a whole nother level. So what was it like transitioning out of the military into the civilian life?
It was pretty difficult. I think all of us go through that same thing when we make a transition from a very rigid structure and a very understandable framework to something that is super amorphous, that has apparently very few rules, and you realize that anything is possible. And that sounds like a really cool thing, but when up until then, there are only a few courses to follow, and now there's no course at all. It can be pretty difficult. So one of the things I did right off the bat is I had a little bit of money saved. I borrowed a bunch more and bought a little sailboat and sailed it from San Diego down through the Panama Canal and then up to Florida on the other side. And that was a little bit of a metaphor for me of being on this kind of trackless place in the ocean, but knowing that in general I was going south until I hit the canal, and then I was going to go north until I basically hit America and then turn right and get to Florida. And that allowed my mind to kind of make a little bit of a shift from such a regimented schedule to making a lot more of my own decisions and making those decisions in what I began to understand was really reality. And that's the ocean, or that's any kind of outdoor, big natural environment where you have to work within, really the rules of physics, and they matter out there. And a lot of the stuff in society doesn't matter so much, whether you're nice or not, but whether you're a good salesperson or you get along with people or whatever. Like, those things can shift really fast and really fluidly, but physics doesn't shift. Big wind is always big wind. Big waves are always big waves. Things can get super scary out there, and you have to shape your mind around it rather than having it shape its mind around you, which is how human communication works.
Ooh, that's so interesting. And you're right. I think sometimes when we say the world's your oyster, you can do anything, people can shut down in that spot because they're like, I don't even know what I want for dinner. Like, how am I going to know what I want to do for the rest of my life? So you gave your body and your brain some space to kind of calm down. How long was that trip?
It was about 5.5 months. And I got lucky enough about 2.5 months into it through a series of events to meet up with Lee, who is, I met her in a breakfast cafe and we ended up getting married.
Aw.
And she was the one.
Not right after.
Not right
That's
after.
so cute. Did you join him on the boat?
No.
Like that's a documentary or something.
I know, right?
Despite getting an invite. No.
Yeah.
So once I met Lee, and maybe Lee, you can talk about this a little bit. That was when the unraveling of my mind as a military person started, and I began to see more of the possibility. And Lee, maybe you can talk about kind of how you discovered that yourself, or what you saw happening in me.
Yeah, I kind of started, I grew up pretty feral. I grew up in New Mexico, and I grew up in a trailer park in New Mexico, and it had a lot of freedom, which was really cool. So it was always kind of a fend for yourself type situation. So, which is actually an awesome place, because then you get to exercise this thing inside of you that, what do I want to do? What do I want to create? What do I want to be? So I've always, dove into being an entrepreneur. I mean, I started, when I was in my early 20s, I started, I got a degree in holistic health, and I worked down at the cancer clinics down in Mexico, lecturing about juices. Back then, cancer clinics were located down there for alternative therapy. So that was fascinating. I got to see a lot of really interesting things taking place in the health field. And early on, in my 20s, I traveled a lot. So I wanted to cross North Africa by foot across the Sahara. So I decided I wanted to
another documentary. Holy cow.
Yeah. I actually never crossed it, but it's a really cool story. I decided I better start working with camels. And so I started tracking down camels, right? I just knew that, in America, and I just knew they were, going to be the mode of transportation. So I thought, I eventually made my way to a zoo and to actually physically see a camel, and they had left. And I said, what do you mean they left? And they said, there's a camel farm in Kokomo, Indiana. It's one of the largest camel farms in the world. And I said, oh, I've got to go there. So I went and I begged the guy for a job, and he said, no, no, no. And I eventually wrote him a letter, and I said, hey, you're going to cause a divorce, because I'm going to have to go to Australia to work with camels. And he hired me, and I helped with the farm, and got beat up. I was helped run the farm.
Beat up by the animals.
Beat up by the animals.
Were you spit on?
Oh yeah, they actually regurgitate. So
wow.
They don't form a spitball. They hawk food on you.
Okay.
So it's
well, I just have to ask, because I feel like dreams, you have to see something in order to start dreaming it.
Yeah.
So where did that dream get birthed in you?
I don't know. It was I've always loved journeys. So whether it's a train journey, a journey on foot, that's something I just am super passionate about. So I just dreamed up this thing of North Africa, and I mean, who knows where this love comes from, right? Like that. And from the camel farm, I ended up meeting a nomad from the desert. And then I ended up going to the Sahara with him I think we were there for 3 weeks. And that was the first time I'd been there, actually had physically been in the Sahara. And I was amazed. I remember the first night I was out with a bunch of nomads, my friend's family that I'd met from the farm. And I was like looking up at the sky. And if you've never been to the Sahara, from one point of the horizon to the other point, you're like in a fishbowl of stars. It's just so amazing. And the nomads were looking at me like, what are you staring at? And it was just such an amazing point in my life where all these dreams that I had worked for had come together in that moment at that night. And I was just like, it was just like a, beam of light, and then
soaking it all in.
So, and then I ended up trying to ask people to go across the Sahara with me, and they thought I was all crazy. And my friend that I met from the farm, the nomad, I ended up going to business with him with an expedition company in Mali. And so that was a really cool experience, because he actually did the expeditions and I actually ran the company from here, from the States. But I remember the first morning when somebody wrote in to get a tour, and I was thinking, I don't know what this person's talking about, what they want. And I just remember I just started walking in that direction to figure the stuff out. And 2 weeks down the road, I knew more than I had 2 weeks before. Sometimes it's just start walking down the path, start learning. And then 2 weeks down, you're going to be better than you were 2 weeks ago. And so it's just,
absolutely,
pushing through that.
And this is all before you met Nik?
Yep. This is all right before I met Nik. Yep.
Okay. So you met Nik in a cafe.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you noticed in him coming from the strict military it's interesting because when you grow up in society and in the military and even in the suburbs, there's cultural rules, right? And it sounds like you've kind of always been outside of that, thinking outside the box, being creative, trying new things. You've had quite the adventures, not just stay at a job for 30 years, hate your life, and then retire, which is kind of what I was taught. Yeah. So you already came from this out of a box perspective, and then you met Nik. Tell me what that was like.
Well, I started working at the cafe, just to make a long story short. I started working at my business partner with the desert expedition company, ended up getting killed. And, our business was taken off. It was all doing really well. And then there was a tragic accident over there. And so I started waiting tables. Everything kind of went into arbitration. And I started waiting tables. I just lost one of my best friends. And Nik, that was like a month later, Nik comes walking up to the cafe and he's got this wild blonde hair, nothing that you would think military would be. Wild blonde hair, he was in board shorts. This was in Indiana. And I said, that guy's from Southern California. It was like February in Indiana and he had Uggs on and, board shorts and sat in my section. He was with his mom and dad. He was 23 years old. So just to give you some reference, I was 35 at the time. So you look at it and you're just like, this got like one night stand all over it, right? Nothing like 23, right out of the military, from a 35-year-old, you're looking at it like it's, and I was pretty distraught over my friend. And so he came up to me, I was chatting with him. His boat was in Nicaragua. So I was talking to him about Nicaragua a little bit. And then he comes up to me afterwards and he said, hey, would you like to go listen to some music tonight? And I was like, let me think about it, So I gave him my number and his story is, I got her number within 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, it was the number to the restaurant, and he was leaving the next day. So he called the restaurant. He goes, oh, the band starts at 8. And I was like, I really don't want to go, but have fun on your sailing trip. And he was like, what? And, this, you don't want this, And then we ended up staying in touch via email. And we had such an awesome email chain. Every time he went into the port on his sailing trip, we would email back and forth. And it was great talking about, life and books and travel and adventure. And he ended up making it to Florida and then he flew back up to Indiana. And I had forgot what he looked like. I forgot what he sounded like. And, this was like 4 or 5 months later and he ended up showing back up in Indiana and we'd been together ever since.
The rest is history, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and it's been awesome. It's been like 17 years.
So I love that you were a journey person. You were an adventure person, and then when Nik came home from the military, he went on his own adventure. Yeah, in his own journey. Did you see his mindset start to shift throughout those months, even through email?
A little bit. I think he's always been. He's always been pretty fascinated about exploring and stuff like that. And I think a lot of those team guys are, we know a lot of them as friends and they're all fascinating men and they're not really your run of the mill. They're all into something really wild and fascinating. So he's pretty typical in that sense, and he's also one thing he learned from the military that I've learned in business that he's brought to the table is leadership, such good leadership that you get from the military and structure. And it's something that I don't really have any experience in. I have experience in like creativity and like, let's do this and we can do anything. And he's more, this is how it's going to get done. These are the steps. So it's
that is a good fit.
It's a good fit.
I work with my husband as well. We both work full time on our business, and
nice.
It is fun to use your gifts and strengths in your zone and have it mesh. So you're kind of the visionary, and he's the finisher. Like, you both need each other, right?
Yeah. Are you guys the same way, or?
Yes. Well, he's the visionary and I'm the finisher.
Oh, nice. That's great.
Well, that's what I feel about us too.
Yeah.
I'm really good at give me the roadmap. I'll do it. I'm disciplined, all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like he sees things outside the box, and he's always questioned the status quo a bit. Whereas I'm like a rule follower. And so it's been kind of fun for us to grow, but
it can you can butt heads sometimes, but we always say, I'm Nick's I'm an unstoppable force and he's an immovable object. So you get those sometimes, we've had to develop structures to deal with, disagreements. Right. So it's,
Yeah. Even that, we'll definitely talk about how you guys work together. Cause I even know, I know from experience that is sometimes a challenge. But Nick, tell me a little bit more. Once you got back, you kind of unraveled, you started to see things a little bit differently. Was Paleo Treats the first company you started?
No, it was the 8th or the 9th. So I came back and tried to follow that same path that you've talked about, go to school, get a job. I thought I was going to be an elementary school teacher and swim in the Olympics, and kind of had my whole life planned out, and all of it turned out to be wrong. And I think it was in 2004 that I started the first business, and I'd gone over to Iraq as a contractor and seen that the way they were building over there it could be done a lot better. And so I thought that I could be the person to make that happen. And it turned out, again, I was completely unprepared for that and had a really good idea, but no understanding of how to execute on it. And then that started kind of a series of Lee and I starting our own businesses. Lee had always worked for herself. So she'd been a mortgage broker and worked in that, especially in the real estate boom, had done really, really well. But we began to kind of hone in on this thing of maybe we can work together on this same thing, on our own thing, and build, something that is a thing that we can both contribute to. And so we had a t-shirt company that went into Nordstrom and Fred Siegel, and we kind of figured out some good parts, but we'd also made some pretty bad mistakes financially, and that ended up going under. So we went bankrupt out of that one and lost kind of everything we'd worked for. Had a couple houses and a piece of land and all kinds of stuff, and we're kind of left at the end of that with nothing but the house we had that we lived in. And so from there we started to rebuild, and it's like once that entrepreneur bug bites and you realize the benefits of working for yourself, and you realize that it's a good fit for you. And I think this is an important piece to kind of pause at and say it's not a good fit for everyone, despite what is kind of put out there by the general media. It's working for yourself it's for a special person, and that person can't work for other people. And there are people out there who can't work for themselves, and encouraging people to work for themselves when they're not ready for it. It's like putting a toddler on the freeway. They're just not ready for it. They need to be in a different space,
or they don't thrive in it.
Or they don't thrive. Yeah. So we begin to kind of see, okay, what are the businesses we can do together? And we had a welding business and a notary business and the t-shirt company, the building
ATM business.
We had an ATM business, like a bunch of stuff, and most of them failed. Some of them did all right. And eventually we kind of came into Paleo Treats as a confluence of what we were doing in our personal lives. So we were eating paleo and realized there was no dessert at the time in 2009. And we'd also just gone bankrupt over this other company and had a little bit of breathing room and also space to think about what we wanted to do. And all of that came together to kind of force us into forming Paleo Treats.
It's amazing what you take from companies that you've failed. So it's, we had the clothing company, and we were really picky about the clothing, the t-shirt. We were picky about what went on it. And to this day, I have people come up to me and say, God, I wish you guys made those again. And so we took that same standard or values for quality, and we put that into Paleo Treats, which is, we're really picky about taste, been around for 10 years, only come out with 7. And people, we got this little cult following of people with our stuff. So it's amazing what you adopt from all your businesses, whether they failed or not.
Yeah, we always say success is really failing forward, right? Where you take action and you just learn from it. And regardless of if it actually makes money or not, you've learned something every single step of the way. So I'm assuming you also, made connections and learned, expanded your brain cells you learn more, right, over those years. So tell me, I work for a health and wellness company. We love eating healthy. We totally align with whole food, all of that stuff. I'm interested in your switch even to paleo personally. Tell me a little bit about why and what you experienced when you made that transition, and then we can move into your products.
We had a friend in the military that moved in with us, stayed with us for a while, and he had eaten paleo since he was 04. And I had always eaten pretty healthy, but I didn't really pay attention to, the grains and stuff. And so he moved in, and it was easier just to all eat paleo because we all ate dinner together. So started eating paleo, getting rid of, the gluten, the grain, and the dairy, basically anything that's going to kind of cause a reaction in your system, possibly. And 2 weeks into it, we were just like, wow, man, my energy is way up. And I think that's one of the first things you'll feel is you don't get that slump in the middle of the day. And we were like, wow, there's something to it. 2 to 3 weeks into it, we were, missing dessert. So that's how paleo treats ended up starting. I think that was the biggest thing, is just how we felt. We felt better. And then we thought as it went on, we would probably slack off a little bit and do it 80-20, but you get into this mode of listening to your body more. And so you realize, wow, when you eat something that feels, junky, you really feel it and you don't really want to go back to it. So Nick and I are pretty strict. Food becomes fuel to feed your body and feed your cells, and it doesn't really, it's not based on emotion. Like, what do I feel like having? I feel like having a pizza, so you just start looking at food different.
You do. I did a bodybuilding competition a few years ago, which totally changed my view of food and how it nourishes me. And I cut out dairy at that time. Inflammation went way down.
Yeah.
And I think what you want, like I want this changes, because you don't really want that stuff eventually, because it makes you feel like sluggish and gross. And
I always tell people, why not try it? Like you're on this planet for 70, 80 years. Why not take a section of time, whether it's 2 weeks or a month, and see how healthy you can eat, how much nutrition you can put into your body, and see why not try it? Why not explore that?
Why not take a little journey?
Yeah, it's a journey. It's pretty cool.
Well, and I bet when you're eating this way, you'll probably live even longer.
That's right.
Now, Lee, I do have a question for you, because you are also working in the holistic arena back in your 20s.
Yep.
So this really kind of aligns with your previous passion of health and wellness and treating sickness and disease holistically and trying all natural options and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a degree in holistic health, which was awesome introduction to a lot of stuff like Reiki and crystals, and, New Mexico's a lot like that, and chakras and all that stuff. So it was a really cool introduction. Acupuncture massage, Rolfing, all that stuff. And then I ended up hooking up with somebody who owned Norwalk juicers. And I ended up, back then you drank a lot of juice. And I ended up working with him, and I lectured down at the clinics down in Mexico, and the Gerson Institute was really popular back then, and they were treating, terminally ill people with bombarding the body with nutrients. They did a lot of juice, which, looking back on it, I don't know if they still do that in their program, but they drank a lot of like carrot juice, and I saw a lot of people get better. I saw a lot of people not get better. I mean, it's a holistic approach to your body and how you think and how you feel, and what are you doing for exercise, and are you allowing your body to heal itself? And there's so many factors that are involved. And I think it's even more fascinating now because of everything that they're doing now with epigenetics and what the stuff they're doing at MIT and Stanford. It's so fascinating, and it's moving so fast. And now the ketos come in and what they're doing with that. And so it's amazing. It's really fascinating.
It is. And we really do have the ability to heal ourselves from the inside out. And a lot of it has to do with the environment we give ourselves. You know, you can put a cell in a toxic environment and it will die or shrivel up, or you could put that same cell in a healthy, thriving environment and that cell will thrive. So I told this is how I get my 7-year-old to eat vegetables. We need our body to have a healthy environment so that way we have more energy and we're more chipper and things like that. And so you guys had an experience in that, but then the paleo was something you really connected to personally because you saw results. Nick, what type of results did you see when you started eating this way and cutting out all the inflammatory stuff?
Well, I had these really strong allergies to dogs, but really until we started eating paleo, and I had decided kind of all.
And is that a dog behind you? Did I see?
There's 3 of them in the room with us. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, I swear I saw a dog.
From 0 to 3.
Cured the allergies, and part of that is definitely due to paleo. There was a big, long process that was a couple of years worth of trying all these things that Lee was talking about, and she was the one that opened up my mind to maybe thinking beyond Western medicine. Because I remember right when I got out of the Navy, I'd gone to the doc and said, "Hey, I'd like to get a dog. How do I become allergy free?" And he said, "Oh, it's going to be, you're going to have a shot every week for the rest of your life." I said, "Well, that's not worth having a dog for me." And he said, "You'll still have some symptoms." So it just math didn't add up for me. But then at one point when we moved into this house, we said, we're going to get a dog and I'm going to fix these allergies, because I'd had a couple experiences where I didn't have any symptoms at all in a house. And then a dog would, stranger's house or a friend's house, a dog would kind of walk around the corner, a cat would walk around the corner, and all of a sudden all the symptoms would be there. And I thought, I thought
it was totally psychological. It was a huge benefit. It's a huge psychological thing for him.
So that was
just noticing.
Yeah, a big piece of it. But once we started eating paleo, that, this goes into how people change behavior, but that gave my mind the structure to feel like I could do something physically that would complement what I was doing mentally, which was affirmations and all kinds of healing stuff, electrode therapy, acupuncture, massage, anything crazy diets, anything I could find. And they all helped a little bit, but paleo is kind of this really strong framework for me to build on top of. And over the course of about a year and a half after I went paleo, I completely cured the dog allergy.
It was interesting because he said, I think I'm ready to get a dog. And I was like, hey, when we get a dog, the dog's not going to go back. It's going to be our dog for life. And so whatever symptoms you're going to have, you're just going to, so he picked out this dog he wanted, and he brought the dog home, and Nick was like miserable. He was like, and he was writing affirmations. He got Louise Hay's book, and every day he has a book of affirmations that he wrote, and he would, he'd bend over and just snot would just pour out of his nose. He was that bad. And at night he just couldn't, he was asthmatic, so he couldn't breathe, and he would, and I kind of hooked in my head as like, he got a lot of attention with that when he was his whole life, are you okay? And so I was thinking, we made an agreement, like I wasn't going to give him any attention when he, I wasn't going to encourage like, oh, are you okay? So I couldn't say anything, which was, I felt bad. And he eventually worked through that all with Louise, help with Louise Hay's affirmations. And it was amazing. And he was that bad. It was bad. And
well, and I love that. Affirmations really aren't necessarily about what life looks like now. It's all about what you want life to look like, right? So you're like, what were they? I'm a dog lover. I am so grateful for the 3 dogs who roam around, and I feel so healthy,
Yep. Yeah,
but you kind of like speak that, and then it happened for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, It was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool experience. It was neat.
Yeah, it's a combination of, physical environment and mental environment, and a little bit of acknowledging that we humans at this point in time don't fully understand how the world works. And so we have to be open to it working, even though we don't understand it. And that
just like gravity, we don't quite get it, but we
don't
fight it.
You're going down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of questions about paleo treats itself. I see in the notes that I have that there's 7 pillars of paleo. What does that mean?
That's funny. That's changed over the years. But what we saw, those 7 pillars have changed as we've refined really our understanding of paleo. We saw when we first went paleo that really a lot of people were focusing on just the diet. What do you eat? And then it became a little bit like, when do you eat it? So some of the intermittent fasting stuff, but it was still focused on what you're putting in your mouth and how nutrition affects you. And we saw, because I'd come from a fairly physical background and I was doing CrossFit, that was really, that was our first audience, that movement or exercise was also a part of what we thought of as paleo. And we began to expand that lens of understanding. So really, when you're going paleo, what we advise or advocate is kind of stepping into that mindset of what was life like for people over 10,000 years ago. What was life like before there was farming? And then how do we take a lot of those principles and apply them to what our life can be like now? And you don't have to, obviously people are like, I'm not going to live in a cave or, never cut my hair or whatever. Like, okay, that stuff is not as important. But there are these things that keep surfacing as being healthy and supportive of humans thriving. So one of them is nutrition. One of them is movement. So how we exercise. And whether that's walking around the block with your dogs or a CrossFit workout or ultra marathons or triathlons.
Gardening.
Gardening, like just that movement
Physical.
idea. One of them is restoration. And so we used to call that sleep. And then as we kind of thought about it more, we thought, well, there's time for meditation as well. And there's time for downtime and thinking about, if you're going to put in the movement and the nutrition, you need time to restore from that stuff. So whether you're fasting when it comes to nutrition, or you're taking a day off when it comes to movement, like that restoration piece is important. Community is an important part of a healthy life. So some of us are introverts like Lee, and some of us are extroverts like me, but we all need a connection kind of web of people around us. And then we decide how we're going to interact with that web of people. But nobody that I've ever met seems happy living completely by themselves and isolated. So it's like a natural human condition, but it's not something that everyone pays attention to. So there's community, and then there's time in nature. And these all start to kind of work into each other. So time in nature and restoration and community and food and all that goes together. You put together even a backyard barbecue, and you have your friends over. And so all these things are starting to come together. But for Lee and I, time in nature has been really not just restorative, but essential to being healthy. And then the 6th one is your mindset. So how you think. And this is something that it's more difficult now, funnily enough, with more information on how to think than I believe it used to be. Is that we used to have this really wide open view of how the world worked. And we learned really organically in a way that is almost impossible today because there were so few restrictions or guidelines. So a lot of the mental piece is just kind of thinking about how you think and thinking about what your thoughts are and what's important and saying, okay, for social media, that can be a really powerful piece if I focus on the community building side of it. It can be a really negatively powerful piece if I focus on comparing myself to other people, right? Because almost all of us on social media live this really curated life, right? I'm not going to put on Facebook the time that I fight with Lee and we're really upset at each other. I'm going to put the time when I went paragliding and it was a peak experience. And I think that's just something that we all want to do, is share the positive and not really share the negative. And then the last pillar that we think of now is music. And this is a new one that we've added recently, but I see that every human I've met responds to music in some way. And I think we're going to continue to refine that idea further of maybe it sounds, maybe it's something a little bit more amorphous, but whether you like rock and roll or classical or Spanish guitar or whatever, techno, it doesn't matter. We all respond to music in a really powerful and healing way. And if you look at some of the ways that people have healed themselves, it's through the use of music and vibration. And so all those 7 things are what make up the 7 pillars of paleo, and how we kind of help people understand how to be really helpful or how to be really healthy without necessarily spending $1 million on some crazy program.
Or just focusing on diet.
Or just limiting themselves to
yes.
diet. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, you guys are speaking my language. I feel like music is such an easy way to instantly uplift our mood.
Yeah.
And I'm a type A, I'm a learner. I'm like podcast and bookworm, like drive, that kind of person.
Yep.
But I've noticed more recently the importance of putting music into my everyday because it just naturally lifts me up. So I love that one. But I was a clinical psychologist before we started our business. And so I love your holistic approach to your company because you're like, the food is important. It really, it is. And it can be a great starting point, but there's so much more that can really make people become the best version of themselves. And that's really cool.
Yep.
So I pulled up your website and you have some delicious options here. Tell me a little bit about what products you currently have. How do you make them if there's no flour or grain? And tell me a little bit more about how this works.
Yeah. So we have 7 treats. They're prepackaged. They're gluten, grain, and dairy free, only sweetened with honey. There's no filler in them. So there's no, yucca flour or cassava flour or anything like that. It's nothing that takes up a lot of space in the product. So they're very nutritionally dense. And they come in little cups and a lot of people will chop them up and eat a little sliver here and there. You can store them in the freezer. And the biggest thing is that they taste really good. We wanted to make a product that even if you didn't eat healthy, you would love them. And we just didn't want to make a healthy product. And so we've got a lot of followers that, don't necessarily eat paleo, but they see the benefit of having a good dessert. If you're going to eat something, you're going to take in calories, why not make it good and why not make it healthy as you can?
Well, and I think that the whole, I don't want to say sugar, people, however they eat, right? They are learning that processed foods with high flour and high sugar is really just high inflammation. And so I agree that even if they're not necessarily full paleo, or they would benefit they would see the benefit of eating something that's not full of the junk, right?
Yeah. And we also talk to people about what are you eating for breakfast? What are you eating for lunch, snack, and dinner? If you limit your sugar intake all throughout the day, a little treat at the end of the day is, not going to, kill you.
It's going to be a part of supporting
It's
your
going to be
health.
a part of supporting the health. Yeah.
But most people eat some kind of what we would think of as dessert for breakfast. They have
and then
Pop-Tarts
dessert for,
cereal or whatever. So it's like dessert 3 meals a day. No, you can't have dessert after your 3 desserts.
Yeah. When you think of coffee cake, it's really just cake.
Yes.
Yeah. And coffee flavoring. Yeah.
We saw it's easy to, grab a recipe and make a pan of brownies off the internet, but can you make we found it difficult to make an epic pan of brownies, that was also paleo. So we worked really, really hard on our recipes, and we've got one that's a flourless chocolate cake. We've got an almond butter cup that's our lowest in sugar. It's 7 grams of sugar. The keto low sugar people love that one. Mustang bar is like an oatmeal cookie. That's another one that's a low sugar one. Only has 9 grams of sugar. And again, these are dessert. So they're a treat, little treat for you at the end of the day that supports your healthy.
I see cacao powder, almond flour, coconut oil, pecans, honey. These are whole food ingredients.
Yes.
I can pronounce them.
Yes. You know what they are. Yeah.
That was kind of the directive for us internally. It was when we're using ingredients, we want them to be real foods, to be whole foods, to be something that you can pronounce and you can understand and not worry about, is this monodiaglucosaccharide, whatever's out there, is that natural or not? Like, nope, honey, almonds, raisins, goji berries. It's not magic. It does take some work to figure out what the ratios are to make it taste good and fit within a paleo framework.
Now, what I think is really cool is you guys, you had the background of being a holistic practitioner and interested in that. And you were in the paleo, eating paleo yourself, and you saw a need. And so you said, okay, I want to fix this. I see it, right? I see a need. Let's fill it. But you didn't have necessarily experience in the food industry or how to scale, like how to create it and make it. And I'm sure there was a lot of lessons you learned along the way. So tell me a little bit about the past 10 years business-wise.
Yeah, so I think the biggest part with starting a business is you don't have to know what you're doing to start a business. You have to be willing to solve problems when they come up, and you have to be willing to constantly expand your mind and think about new ways of doing something. But if you're driven to find solutions, you're probably going to end up being successful. I mean, you may not. You may run out of options before you find that good solution. But we made the first 2,000 treats in our kitchen, which is, I mean, it's smaller than the room we're in now. Tiny little kitchen, kind of Southern California bungalow, maybe 300 square feet. And we said, we're never going to do that again. That's not a way to.
We were hand sealing them, and our whole brand
pulling all-nighters.
Our brand was like, very military font, airplanes on it, and it's they still have like, the names Brownie Bomb, because these two guys were, just out of the military. And then we took them up to one of the first CrossFit games up in Aromas at Dave's Ranch, and we were thinking, we had 2,000 of them. We'll end up just giving them away. And they ended up selling out the morning of the second day. And we had people that were, I'll take 15 of them. And so then we knew that we had something. And, it's always a challenge. I mean, there's so many challenges just on a daily basis, and it's been fun.
I've been an entrepreneur for 11 years. And because I was an employee mindset, that's kind of the world I came from, I had to learn the entrepreneur mindset, which was vision, which was mindset, which was, it's not a no, it's a not now, or it's a roadblock, it's not a stop sign, those kinds of things. Yep. But I've also learned that everything is learnable. If you don't know how to do something, there's probably somebody else who does. So did you guys reach out and meet anybody or partner with mentors or find people that had been down this road before?
Wow, that's a really great question at this time, because this was fascinating. So I do martial arts, and my martial arts teacher yesterday, so we've never really had mentors. Nick and I have been more the mentor to people, or helping people, or giving people advice. And Nick sits on the entrepreneurial advisory board of FedEx, and he works with Red Bull athletes. And just yesterday, my martial arts teacher said, "Hey, have you heard of this guy named Dan Locke?" And I said, "Never heard of him." And he goes, "Well, he's this guy, he's, entrepreneur. He's had 14 businesses that failed." He said, "Watch his videos and let me know what you think." Cause he goes, "I've watched all his YouTube videos." And he goes, and Nick and I watched his videos last night, and we were listening to him in the car, and he talked about mentors and how much mentors have helped him. And I think that's amazing with being an entrepreneur. You're kind of like a sponge, and you learn from these people, and then it just like you absorb this, and you're just like, you wake up and you're not the same. You're just like, what did I just learn? And it just elevates you. And, learning from people like Elon Musk and Ellen and Beyonce and, and looking at those people, and Lady Gaga, and Chanel, and looking at what they have done with their brand. And you can learn from all those people, regardless of whether they're music or artists. They're all like fighting the fight. It's
they're keeping their vision alive. And I feel like we always have to kind of rekindle our own personal vision, because it's always easier to watch Netflix, right? It's always easier to just be like, all right.
Or check. It's easy to check out.
It is. But when you've got that bug, that that's not really easier, right? Because this is where we're passionate. This is when time goes by fast. This is when we can create momentum. And so you went to the CrossFit games. You knew you had your hands on something. When did you really start to see that growth within your company?
Probably took 2 years. At the time, so there's 3 of us that started. My friend Dave, myself, and Lee. Dave ended up leaving the company, I think, after the first 2 years. But Dave and I both had regular W-2 jobs. I was working as an instructor at the Navy at the time as a civilian instructor. So I had a regular kind of, wasn't 9 to 5, it was 6 to 2, but whatever, a daily job. And that income supported, Lee and I. So we didn't really have to do anything with Paleo treats. And it was kind of this fun side thing that we were exploring.
And Paleo wasn't heard of back then. That was the
Right.
thing. So even
It's
though
so interesting. 10 years ago, you're right.
Yeah.
It was,
even though it's just, you look at the ingredients and you're just like, it's just real food. It's just whole food. People were so stuck on gluten-free back then, and it wasn't heard of. So that was kind of,
So when we met with Whole Foods, they said, well, we don't really know where to put you. We can put you in the gluten-free section, but it's not refrigerated.
and it's really small. And we were just like, but Whole Foods, it's just real food ingredients,
So it was about 2 years of that. And then I said, look, if we're going to do this, or we said this, kind of came to this conclusion together. If we're going to do this, let's go for it. So I quit the Navy job. I picked up a contracting gig for about 9 months to build up a bunch of money. So I was going over and working on merchant ships, guarding them in the Middle East, and then finished that and came back, and we took that kind of money and time and experience and plowed it all into Paleo Treats. We hired our first 2 employees, and we got an office outside of the house. And that was when it really started taking off. So that was 2012, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when we went from, $30,000 a year to 200 plus. And that was like the first big jump, was when we started really taking it seriously.
you really had to pivot and go all in and put more time into it and go for it rather than a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things that has always stuck with me, 2 things that I've learned is, don't worry about selling to the masses, worry about making a good product and selling to, the 5 people that are around you. And that's one thing that I really learned from,
Seth Godin.
Oh yeah, Seth Godin said that. And he said, if you've got a skateboard company, don't worry about getting the skateboard wheel out to, millions of people. Worry about the 5 kids at the skateboard park. And that's been really cool, helping build community, especially here in San Diego. And then another thing I just heard the other day was rejection is protection. I thought that was a really rad way to look at rejection. And it's just protecting you from people that you shouldn't be involved with anyway. And it's steering you towards the path that you need to be on.
I love that.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into Whole Foods?
No, we actually ended up, we talked to Whole Foods, I think it was 2 years in a row, and they kind of said the same thing. And that, I think 2015, we ended up winning one of the top 10 small businesses in the country through FedEx. And that opened up a whole channel of us becoming experts in shipping perishable foods. We got access to their labs. We came in as advisories to FedEx about it. And so we ended up just shipping direct to consumer mostly. We're in about 50 stores in the country, more small mom and pop stores, and health, wellness centers, gyms, stuff like that. And then we also have a retail store. So we're kind of hitting it on those 3 fronts. And
very cool. And I see that you have a website,
Yep.
paleotreats.com, but you also are on Amazon.
Yep. On Amazon.
Yeah. Plans to expand there. So I think that's that's one of the really cool things about being alive now in 2018, 2015, whatever, is that you can build a tiny little niche company for paleo desserts and exist online and make the money that you need to make just online. And you don't have to go through grocery stores or middlemen. You can, it's a fun part of it, or can be an important part, but you get to decide as the entrepreneur, what do you want to do and what's important to you?
I think also you said a really amazing word, which it's pivot. You have to, you pivot. We pivot so much, and, not in a bad way, but you have to be able to pivot, because if something's not working, you have to be able to move into the direction that something's working, and you have to be able to pivot your mindset. And
it's like focused flexibility.
Yes.
Yep.
My eyes are where I'm going, but the road, the journey, it'll change, and I got to learn, I got to adapt.
You got to
that
adapt.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have 2 questions left for you. Lee, one of the things you've said is that you are really interested, you love the journey. You've done crazy things. You've, gone to the Sahara. You are a photojournalist in Nicaragua. You've done a lot of crazy, fun experiences. And you've also talked about following your inner voice, like trusting your intuition. And it seems like doing those things is because you kind of just followed, like you said, just keep saying yes, just keep saying one step at a time, and the how will figure itself out. Tell me a little bit more about trusting that intuition, trusting your gut, because it's taken you on some pretty crazy adventures.
Yeah, I think as a woman, we need to listen to that voice inside. And for pretty much, you have to build up confidence of trusting that voice. And a lot of it, you may not have that confidence at a young age, but as you get older, you're going to realize that, wow, this is a guiding voice that we women have that's amazing. And it's kind of like the universe talks through us. Nick and I talk about this all the time. He's very driven, the men kill, kill, kill. And these women, us as women, we see this wide view. And it's just a matter of trusting that voice and also being quiet enough to listen to what that voice is saying. Get still. And in that stillness of that moment, and listen to what it's saying, and actually listen to your body. And, maybe I don't have to be a runner, maybe running doesn't work for me. Maybe it hurts my joints, but walking does, and so getting out of your own way of your head of what you should be doing, and, we're all different. So you got to listen to your little guiding voice.
Yeah, allow that little knowing, because it's, when I think it's interesting when we talk about this, trusting your intuition or building that intuition, building that listening ear, it can seem kind of far away for people that have never experienced it, but it's not necessarily like an audible voice. It's more of a knowing, right? Where it just kind of, you can feel pulled or touched or connected in some level. And you listening to your own intuition and your own gut, like, is that what drew you to all these adventures throughout your life?
Yeah. And also I dealt with my dad passing away when I was little, and maybe I had this thing in my life of like how short life is. And, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to experience it? I've always wanted to see something. If I felt like if there was, I'd gotten into, wanting to be a war correspondent at one point and being a photojournalist. So I was like, I really needed to experience what a war was like, and what was going on with the people and the place and what it really meant. And, what you read about it in the news and in the paper, but what is it really like on the ground? And I was lucky I got to hang out with a photojournalist for the LA Times. This was during the Iran-Contra war. And it was really interesting what actually happened and then what actually appeared in the paper. So I think if you have some inkling of something you want to experience, like I love the violin, then you should dive into what are those like? What are the people like? What are the people who make it? What are the people who create the symphonies for violin and stuff? So I think if you have this desire, you should explore it just for joy, for happiness.
Yeah. And it seems like you've
checked the box. Why not?
Yeah, you've listened to those desires creep in, but then you take action in them. You went and experienced the war firsthand. You found a camel to connect with. Yeah. You found the nomad in the Sahara Desert. Like, those are things that wouldn't come to you. They're things that, because you took action, like, it's like those coincidences. There's never a coincidence, right? No. You were kind of divinely guided to these spaces, and you met people who could help you check off those boxes. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think also, like, for women, I think, like, what is the I am? Finish the sentence, go through, 70, 80, 90 years of, wow, I am a pilot. When you walk into a room at a party, what are you going to tell people? What do you want to talk about? The I ams. I'm an artist. I know what it's like to be an artist. I'm an entrepreneur. And fill that blank, explore those things. I'm a swimmer, learn to swim at, 50. If you want to learn how to swim, so think about those desires and just like, why not try it?
That's awesome. And then, Nick, one last question I have for you is on my notes here. I have you talk about being stoked and keeping that like stokeness going. So can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, I think it starts with, in the way that we humans understand it, almost the opposite concept of what Lee was talking about with women being, this is something else that Lee and I talk about, is women are really kind of compassionate and caring and giving and non-selfish. And in our relationship, like that's how it works, is that Lee is super is compassionate, giving and non-selfish, and says like, oh, if you want to do this or want to do that, you can do it. For me to keep kind of the excitement and that stoke alive, there's an important aspect to being selfish. And so Lee and I learned from each other that, I need to be more unselfish and she needs to be more selfish. But the example of that is that almost every day I take about 4 hours of the day from 4 p.m. to about 8 p.m. and devote them to flying a paraglider. So that's, packing up the glider and driving out to the site and waiting on the site for the winds and the conditions to get right, and then launching off and flying for however long I've got, and then landing and driving back. The whole thing takes like a 3 or 4 hour block. And that is super selfish when it comes to the business and the dogs and my wife and my friends and all the rest of it. I mean, that's a sixth of every day that I devote to this thing. But because I can devote that sixth, that 4 hour block, I'm almost always super psyched to be living with the rest of my life, because there's that time to really focus in on what is the most pure form of joy for me. When I fly, I've had these peak experiences. It's as if every synapse in my brain is dripping dopamine, and it's like this super orgasm isn't the right word, but it's a peak experience. It's ecstasy. And to have that on a daily basis means that I can come back and give the best of what I've got when it comes time to be creative at the computer, or to work with a team, or to lead people, or to think about what happens next for Paleo Treats, or how we're going to make our pivot, or whatever the next thing is there's always that reservoir of stoke there that comes from paying attention to and being focused on kind of that moment on a daily basis, for me, of diving into is a direct connection to whatever you want to call it, joy or source energy or whatever, and making sure that's a part of my pattern of daily life.
Ooh, I love that. I mean, it is true. It's connecting with your joy. And when we feel that pop up and we know what that is for us, creating a space for that, because even if it may take some time away from other things you could be doing, it really is what keeps you filled up, so you can then overflow and be your best and show up your best in other areas of your life.
Totally. Yep.
Okay. Well, if you guys are interested in supporting this couple and their amazing business, and I know I want to eat as close to sugar-free, right, as possible. And so this totally aligns with the way that I currently eat. I'm very excited. I wonder if I've totally had these before and not even realized it was you guys, because it's definitely something I would pick up and get on Amazon. So go to paleotreats.com, or you can certainly check it out on Amazon. I just searched Paleo Treats and the brownie bomb pulled right up for me. So is there anything else that you guys want to add before we close today?
No, Lee and I are just writing down. We're like, let's do a coupon for these guys. So if you want to if you go to paleotreats.com and you type in Dreamcast, we'll do 10% off any order with the coupon code Dreamcast. And that'd be super cool to see. You can always write in the notes, hey, this is where I found you. We love hearing about that stuff and seeing kind of how this whole community builds and works. And we all get to support each other and say, hey, here's a resource, and there's a source of inspiration, and there's a way for all of us to become kind of healthier, better people.
Awesome. Are you guys on Instagram or Facebook?
Yep. Instagram is at Paleo Treats. That's pretty much Lee's life. Facebook is Paleo Treats fan. Twitter is Paleo Treats. Almost everything is Paleo Treats.
We also have live chat. So if you get on the site and live chat is up, it's usually Nick and I sitting at the computer.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Fun. Well, it was amazing to hear your stories, your work ethic, your vision, and your holistic approach to life. And I know that not just Paleo Treats as an option, but your whole why behind it is going to create a movement, and is creating a movement, and going to impact a ton of people. So I'm grateful to get to know you, and I can't wait to try it for myself.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on.
Thank Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I'll be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.